Welcome everyone to Fundamentals of Kabbalah and Chassidut. We are continuing our series, Cycles of Seven and Secrets of Shabbat. According to request, we are going to pick up where we left off last week, and we're going to learn a little bit about going out of Shabbos and havdala, and Saturday night, Motzi Shabbat, and Malava Malka. That's how we'll start, and we will proceed from there. I did quite a bit of research and learning, and there are many customs, many intentions of all the different parts of havdala. So we're going to call this just a survey. I don't claim to get into every single idea about havdala, but I want to start with first of all, the concept. Havdala means to separate. And we're actually told by the rabbis that depending on the circumstances, there are three different ways to separate between Shabbat and the coming week. And the reason it was considered important is because we enter into Shabbat and we make a clear delineation between the 6 days of the week and Shabbat. It's a different dimension altogether, spiritually, but also halakhically. According to Jewish law, there's certain things you can do during the 6 days of the week, and of course, all the things that we can't do on Shabbat. So there's a separation. So when we go out of Shabbat, we have to acknowledge that we're now leaving the dimension of holiness, of holy time, and returning to mundane time. So the rabbis gave us three different ways to do this. It's not either or, but just so people should know, excuse me. So first of all, when Shabbat ends, and most people today, they look at their calendar, and it'll tell you exactly when Shabbos ends. By tradition, it's with the 3 stars. When 3 stars are visible, that's what's called night. That's when you can go out of Shabbat. But even here, there's many different ways of interpreting when one can end Shabbat. These are very intricate Jewish laws that we're not going to get into. But let's say Shabbat has just ended, and if it's a man, let's say they're going to shul to daven Ma'ariv, the evening prayer. But let's say at that point, a person needs, for whatever reason, to do some kind of work that was not permitted on Shabbat. It's only permitted during the week. So the person hasn't made havdala yet, hasn't done the ritual of havdala yet, and hasn't even davened the evening service. And this applies to women also, who by custom do not daven the evening service, but in the home, how do you make a separation between Shabbat and the week before havdala if you need? And that's a simple formula. Hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. No, excuse me. Baruch hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Blessed is the one who makes a separation, who teaches us how to separate between holy and mundane. Once one says that, one can do malacha, one can do work. Now, many times you don't have to do that unless you're going to do work. So in many cases, men will go to shul, and women will just wait for havdala. But many women want to start cleaning up. So this is the formula: Baruch hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Now, does this mean that you don't have to do havdala now? No, you still have to do havdala. but here you can do work. So in the Amida of the evening service, there is another havdala, but it's not a ritual, it's part of the prayers. And that comes after the first initial 3 blessings that we say in the Amida. And then the next section are requests. So the first request begins with you have graced human beings with dat, with knowledge, and you've taught people understanding. And then we insert a way to separate between Shabbat and the week. And as soon as a man in shul does that, even before he goes home to make havdala, he can do work because this person is separated in the prayers. Now, what's interesting is the formula for separation is similar in a sense with the havdala ritual that we're going to do. And the question is why is it put in this part of the Amida? So the answer is that on Shabbat, we do not make requests in our prayers. We don't make specific requests like we do during the week. And here we are about to make a request because it ends that we say, V'chanenu mi'itcha chachma v'nan dat. Please grace us with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. So they inserted it here in the middle, but before we actually make the request, because it's still Shabbat. Until we go out, someone's still in Shabbat. So that's just an interesting thing. And to add to that is the separation is made in the blessing that we end by saying, Baruch atah Hashem, chonein hada'at. Blessed are you, God, who graces us with knowledge. So what does dat have to do with havdala? So the answer is fairly simple. The first separation that is made, which is based on choice, is with the Eitz Hadat Tov V'Ra, with the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And here it's the tree of knowledge. So we're taught that the sphera of dat, of knowledge, is what we'll call the headquarters of making choices, of being able to distinguish between holy and mundane, and the other parts that we say in havdala, between light and darkness, and everything else that we say. Because that's the function of dat, is to be able to separate, lahavdil, baruch hamavdil ben kodesh l'chol. Also, in the evening service, there is another part that we do only on Motzi Shabbat. We add a number of prayers. And first we add a phrase from one of the Psalms of Moshe. And it says, V'hi noam Hashem Elokeinu, aleinu ma'aseh yadeinu kanana aleinu, u'ma'aseh yadeinu kananehu. Now remember, we're going into the week now. We've already made the havdala. It's now weekday. So the first thing we were requesting in a way is, and I'll translate, may it be that the pleasantness of God, our God, is upon us, and the work of our hands are established upon us, and the work of our hands, may they be established. Sounds better in Hebrew than the English, but it's a very simple prayer to God. We're going into the week. We're going back to the work days, 6 days of work, and we're asking God, let it be a pleasant week, and let it be that the work of our hands are productive, they're fruitful, they're successful. So this is added to the Motzi Shabbat prayers. And then there's one more psalm, which begins, Yoshev B'Seter Elyon. The one who, we're addressing God, to the one who dwells in a very high and hidden place. And the content of the psalm is all about protection. And because again, we're going into the unknown. No one knows what's going to happen in the coming week. We have lots of trust and faith. Everything will be good. God will be by us. We'll be blessed. But who knows? And so we say this psalm, which has many, many different references to ways that God protects us and gives us strength to face any obstacle. And one of the verses is a known verse, Ki malachav yitzavelach, because God will appoint angels for you, lishmorcha b'chol derachecha, to guard you in all of your ways. Very, very beautiful words, that God will send angels to protect you. So all of this is part of the evening prayer. And then comes havdala. Now, I learned something that I never learned before in preparing for the class. And this is something I think I've mentioned before. Many, many people make the assumption that the way we do things now is the way it's been done for thousands of years. Now, there are certain things that are like that, most certainly, but it's far from the whole picture. Even the compilation of a prayer book didn't happen in just a split second. It was a development over many years, and I believe it was just last week where we discussed between what's called the Nusach Ari, between Nusach Sfard, Nusach Sfardi, Nusach Ashkenazi. All of these have developed and gone through changes over the years. Sometimes when I'm doing a wedding and I'm explaining the different parts of a wedding. So again, we go to a wedding and it seems like the formula is exactly the same. And we just assume that's how it's been done for thousands of years. Well, that's far from the truth. The ceremony we have today took thousands of years to get to the point where it is right now. Where will be 100 years from now? There might be new customs that are added along the way. So I'm saying this because apparently when the halacha was being developed, we're going back over 2,000 years ago, the men of the Great Assembly, Anshe Knesset Gedola, they created this ritual called havdala. It's a beautiful ritual full of symbolism. We're going to get into it in a few minutes. But apparently, there were different times in Jewish history where the vast majority of Jews were so poor that to have another cup of wine to do havdala was difficult. It was difficult. It's hard for us to conceive that kind of poverty. And so apparently making the separation and the havdala was inserted in the prayers instead of havdala. And then, again, it wasn't clear what periods of history. Again, we're going back a couple thousand years. There were times where Jews were doing much better. And so they reinstituted havdala because it's such a beautiful ritual. But you need a cup of wine. So actually, I just thought of a story. It's a really important story, is that one time in a congregation, it was difficult for everyone to have a full cup of wine for havdala. So they decided that everyone in the community, this is back in the shtetl where everyone lived very close together, everyone would come to shul and do havdala there. You only need one cup of wine. You don't need everyone to have the same cup of wine. And so it was a problem because people were so poor. So the rabbi said, let's do it this way. I'm going to put a barrel here in the shul. Everyone bring even like this much of wine. And if everyone brings that much, we'll have enough like for months at a time, maybe the whole year. So that's what they did. Everyone brought their little bit of wine. The next week, the rabbi is going to make havdala, and he puts his ladle into the barrel, and he puts it in the cup. It's water. There's no wine. It's all water. He's trying to figure, like, what happened here? Instead of turning water into wine, it's like they turned wine into water. And so then he figured it out. He figured it out. Everyone thought, well, everyone else is going to bring wine. I'll put a little water in, and no one will know the difference. And that's what everyone did. And there was no wine. It was all water. This is a very important story. We can learn something very, very important about this story. But anyways, this is what I learned this week, that for, again, I don't know how long, for a period of time, it went back and forth between everyone being expected to do the havdala ritual with wine and candle and spices, and a time when they only did it in the prayers so that people wouldn't feel obligated to have a full cup of wine if they couldn't afford it. Nowadays, it is mandated that we do havdala because it's considered that we live in a time, and this has been for a while, that we live in a time that we could scrape together a cup of wine. Okay, so now let's go through the havdala ceremony. We're not going to do it word by word, but as we mentioned last week, there's 4 elements besides the different verses that we say. And the verses are all, we'll call them very encouraging. Hine el Yeshuati, Evtach v'lo Evchad. They're all geared to like pumping us up to go into a new week. And we'll see in a second, because and we'll mention it later, many people experience depression on Motzi Shabbat. Why? Because Shabbos is so beautiful and so relaxing and so holy, and we just feel so good. And then it's over, and we have to go back to the week. Now, hopefully for most people, going back to the week is not traumatic. But even if it's not traumatic, you know the expression, like the higher you rise, the harder you fall. And that's like the roller coaster of life. Like the higher you get, you can't stay there forever. So how do you deal with the descent? So there are four elements of havdala: a cup of wine and the blessing on wine, or grape juice, or people should know, let's say you ran out of wine and grape juice. You have nothing. You have no neighbor you can borrow from. You can make it on almost any beverage. You can't do it on water, but any beverage that has some kind of importance, you can make it if you have to. But you would only say shehakol. You wouldn't say the same blessing as wine. Nonetheless, most people try to do it on wine or grape juice. And then the second thing is we smell something sweet or fragrant. Third, we say a blessing over a candle, a fire. And fourth, we say the blessing that separates from the havdil ben kodesh l'chol. So let's go back now. I'll start first with the second thing, the besamim. Besamim means a fragrant herb. Now, there are blessings over fragrant herbs, fruit, flowers, anything that will give a fragrance, you can make a blessing over. But it's actually somewhat complicated because there's really three different blessings. One is the general one, Borei Minei Besamim. We're praising God who makes beautiful fragrances. If it comes from an herb, then it's Borei Isvei Besamim, for the one who makes like fragrant herbs or grasses. And then if it comes from a tree, and this is especially for roses, roses are actually considered a tree because they could last as long as a tree, many, many decades, perhaps even longer. And there it's Borei Atzei Besamim, the one who makes samim from trees. So a lot of people don't know the intricacies of these blessings. So even though there are different minhagim in the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Brura, he says everyone should just say Borei Minei Besamim, because that covers everything. And one doesn't have to deal with the intricacies if one doesn't know the intricacies. So the question is, why do we have to smell something fragrant on Motzi Shabbat? So this is it's kind of a wild way out drasha from the rabbis. When describing Shabbat, we say that God rested on the seventh day, vayinafash, and literally means, and he rested, vayinafash. Now the word nafash, like in modern Hebrew, like a resort is called a place of nofesh, from nefesh. It's a place of, see, we're used to it as a noun, as one of the levels of soul. But as a verb, it means a resting place from this source in the Torah, that God created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested. But vayinafash could also, you could darshan it, that God became very soulful. Vayinafash. God himself manifested soul energy into the Shabbat. Okay, so the rabbis notice that the word vayinafash, you could divide between syllables. And they read it voy nefesh, which voy in ancient Hebrew is the same thing as oi today in Yiddish. Oi levoy, vai. So they read it that, and that's why it's a bit of a way out drasha, because here the Torah is describing God, in a sense, resting on Shabbat. And their drasha is after Shabbat, vai nefesh, oi to the soul. Well, what does that mean? And this gets into the idea that we've discussed in this series, what's called the neshama yetera, that we receive an extra level of soul on Shabbat. And so the sages read when the resting of Shabbat is over, oi to the nefesh, because now the extra nefesh is leaving. And we got so used to it on Shabbat, and we would like so much to hold on to it, but now it's leaving. So the sages suggested smell something fragrant as what we'll call smelling salts. The idea is that if someone's feeling faint, you give them what I call, I don't even know what they are, but smelling salts or something fragrant to revive their soul. So that's the we'll call it the common explanation of why do we have in the ceremony of havdala this idea of smelling something fragrant. Now, interestingly enough, there's another opinion that the wine in the ceremony is for the same purpose. Now, we know that just like we sanctify Shabbat on a cup of wine, so too, when we leave Shabbat, we leave it, we close the circle by making a blessing on wine. But the other explanation is because we have a verse that says that wine makes happy the heart of a person. And so for the same reason that we're leaving Shabbat, oi to the nefesh, vai nefesh, vai nafash, that just like we need the fragrant smelling herbs or flowers, we also need a little wine to bring joy to our hearts. Now we get to the candle. And we're told that it should be not one wick, but a number of wicks, so that it's like a fire, like a flame, not just from an individual candle, but from more than by having more wicks. It's more like a flame. So here there's something very interesting, and I'm going to kind of go on a tangent here, but the tangent will explain the blessing that we make. Borei ma'orei ha'esh, to the one who creates many illuminations in fire. In the Gemara, there was an idea that it should be Borei morei ha'or, to one who creates many illuminations in light. Now the question is, what does it mean, many illuminations in light? So it's understood. This is in the Gemara. This is from 2,000 years ago. This is from Hillel HaZaken. It was his idea. There was another idea. Ma'orei is plural. So that's what we're saying in English, illuminations or colors in light. And the other opinion was why would you make it plural? There's only one illumination in light. Light is the color of light. But Reb Hillel had a deep insight that took approximately 1,600 years to reveal through science. And that is that it was Isaac Newton in approximately 1600 who revealed that light has colors. What we now know is the prism or the rainbow of colors. No one knew that. And he came to this conclusion through studying crystals. And he came to understand that the many colors that are refracted in a crystal are not from the crystal, it's from the light shining through the crystal, and the light itself has the colors. And he said that there were 7 basic colors. These are the colors of the rainbow. But Hillel understood this, and I have to say, I learned this from Rav Ginsburg. This is not my idea. That Hillel understood this, and that's why he insisted on the plural. And what he meant was Borei Morei Ha'esh, Borei Morei Ha'or is to the one who creates colors within light. Now, what's interesting is if you take all the colors in the world and you would spin them very quickly, what you would see in the end is white. All the colors would be reabsorbed into a unity of whiteness. And so this is this is a fact, but the metaphor is connected to the 7 lower sefirot, because light is created on the first day of creation. And we're told that the 7 days of creation parallel the 7 lower sefirot. This is a whole subject in of itself, but it works so perfectly. When you look at the first day of creation, it is chesed. When you look at the second day, it is gevura. And the third day, it is teferet. They're all very obvious. The only one that's, you have to kind of stretch a little bit, and really only a little bit, is the 5th day, being Hod. But all of them work absolutely perfectly. And we're told that, just like we're told thousands of years later, that everything that exists in the universe right now all came from the initial, call it speck or point of the Big Bang that explodes, and everything in the universe is just a continuation of this original explosion. But Rashi, 1,000 years ago, based on a tradition 1,000 years before, is that everything that would ever be created was already created in potential on the first day. And that each day of creation and each day since creation is only an unfolding, an evolution, a revelation, a manifestation of that original energy that was all there on the first day of creation. So all of this is just to explain, it's a very subtle, Borei Morei Ha'esh. And the reason that I'm mentioning all of this is because when we go out of Shabbos, we're starting Yom Rishon. We're going back to the first day of creation. And that is connected to another idea that we have of why do we have a fire? So the first one, I didn't say it completely, is because light is created on the first day of creation. And since when we go out of Shabbos, we're beginning Yom Rishon, is a reflection of the first day of creation. Well, the major creation of the first day is light. And so that's one of the reasons that we have a candle at havdala. We also have it because one of the main mitzvot of Shabbat, one of the forbidden works is lighting a candle, lighting a light, putting out electricity. All of these things are forbidden. So one of the ways we indicate that we're out of Shabbos is by lighting a candle. That becomes an indication that we're out of Shabbos. The other midrash that is brought is that Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden right after Shabbat. According to tradition, even though the decree came that they would have to leave the garden, tradition says that they were allowed to stay for that first Shabbos. But right after Shabbos, they had to leave. And the midrash says Adam and Eve go out of the garden and it's dark. And they're in new territory here, unknown territory. And they became fearful. They didn't know what to do. So it says that Adam took 2 rocks and he hit them together and he made a spark. And from that, they lit a fire. And that's how he discovered light. He created light. So we're told that's one of the reasons that we light a candle is again, to connect to this idea of Shabbos is like the Garden of Eden. I wouldn't even say it's like, it is the Garden of Eden. And then Motzi Shabbat, we have to leave the Garden of Eden. So we light this candle to help light our way in the new week. Now we have the idea, the minhag of looking at our fingernails in the light of the candle that we've lit. So why are we doing this? So one explanation is that the Gemara says that before the sin, Adam's body was considered like a light body, a body of light, meaning it transcended our concept of a physical body. And other explanations in the Gemara say it was like fingernails, meaning that his body reflected light. His whole body reflected light, meaning it was a light body. And that's the secret, that after they sinned, so it said that God made them garments of leather. The word for leather in Hebrew is or, which sounds exactly like light. The only difference is light in Hebrew is written Aleph Vav Resh, and or skin. It's leather or skin. It is written Ayin Vav Resh. Instead of an Aleph, it's an Ayin. So that's how they say that through the sin, Adam and Chava exchanged a body of light for a body of skin. That represents, we'll call it the fall of Adam and Chava, as they went from light bodies to bodies of skin. So that's one of the reasons that we're looking at the light in our fingernails, is to remind us of our potential, of our birthright in the Garden of Eden. Because before they sinned, they had light bodies. And now that we're leaving the garden, but we want to remember what it was like to be that spiritual on Shabbos that we feel like we have light bodies and not just bodies of skin. But there's even a deeper understanding here, is that in Kabbalah, we talk about two types of light: straight light, or yeshar, and returning light, or choser. Straight light and returning light. Straight light represents the light of God from above streaming into this world. Returning light is our responsibility. This is what we do with the light. And this metaphor is continued, that the Torah is called straight light, that God reveals Torah in the world. The returning light are the mitzvot that we do. That's how we return the light. So here, we just experienced this beautiful Shabbat, which is really or yeshar. We're trying to receive this influx of spiritual light and energy from Hashem on Shabbat. And now, as we're going out, to remind ourselves, we look at the light in our fingernails, and it reflects the light. It's or choser. And it gives us strength to know we can hold on at least a little bit to that experience of Shabbat by doing mitzvot. Because Shabbat connects us to God in such a deep way, but so does every mitzvah. And so looking at the light in our fingernails kind of puts the ball back in our court. The light of God is continually flowing into the world. The question is, how much are we receiving it? And what are we doing with it? So by reflecting the light in our fingernails, it's telling us that our mission is to take this light and reflect it back into the world, to rectify the world, make the world a better place. And then we end havdala. Again, we're not going through every word, but we ended with 4 types of separation. And I'll just translate it. Blessed are you, God, our God, King of the universe, who separates between holy and mundane, between light and darkness, between Israel and the nations, between the 7th day and the 6 days of work. Blessed are you, Hashem, who separates between holy and mundane. And that is the end. Then there is a custom of, then the person who made the Brei Priyagofen in the beginning then drinks from the wine and then spills a little bit of it into a plate, and we put out the candle. And they say, why are we spilling the wine on the plate? If you want to put out the candle, just put out the candle. So they say that because yayin is, like we said before, there were times that people couldn't afford a cup of wine. So wine represents, in a certain way, wealth, fullness, provision. And so we pour a little bit. There's actually a custom to pour a little bit on the floor. I've never seen that, but I read that some people actually pour a little bit on the floor as an expression that our house should be full of blessing, full of sustenance. We should be provided for this coming week. My wife, who I think was on this recording for a while, we learned this custom from a good friend of ours, Nate Davidovich, who lives in Efrat, who I believe learned it from his father, alav shalom, very, very holy tzaddik, that before putting out the candle of havdala, he would light 2 candles and then put out the light. In other words, taking the light of Shabbat and bringing it into the week. Just like we light candles before Shabbat and bring Shabbat into the week, like from the beginning of Shabbat. It's called adding Shabbat to the week. Lahosiv kodesh ala chol. So after Shabbat, instead of just putting out the candle, we light 2 candles, and that's how we begin the week. We carry the light of Shabbat into the week. Okay, we're going to end now with just a little bit about Motzi Shabbat, Malava Malka. Also, there are many, many different customs that people have. Malava Malka literally means the escorting the bride. Who is the bride? The Shabbat bride. Like in the beginning of Shabbat, L'cha dodi likrat kala. Come, my beloved, let us greet the bride, the queen, the Shabbat queen. So Malava Malka means literally escorting the Shabbat out. And that's why right after Havdalah, many people sing a song about Eliyahu Navi. Why about Elijah the prophet? Because we're told that Mashiach will not come on Shabbat. He will not come on Shabbat. So the first time Mashiach could come is Motzi Shabbat. And by tradition, it will be Eliyahu Navi who precedes the Mashiach, will announce the Mashiach. And so many people, the first thing they sing is a song for Eliyahu Navi. There's scores of different nigunim for Eliyahu Navi. And Motzi Shabbat, Malava Malka, is connected to David HaMelech. Now, the 3 meals of Shabbat are connected to Avram, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. And the 4th meal of Shabbat, Malava Malka, is David. And these are what are called the 4 legs of the chariot of God's throne. Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, and David. So the question is, but what's beyond that? What's David's connection to Motzi Shabbat? So it's said in the Talmud that David HaMelech he was a prophet. He had Ruach HaKodesh. In fact, the Arizal says in all of Jewish history, there was no one greater in prophecy than Moshe, and no one greater than David in Ruach HaKodesh, in divine inspiration. So David HaMelech knew from divine inspiration that he would die in Shabbat. And so every Shabbat came, who knows, maybe this is it. So when he would get through Shabbat, the tradition is he would make a big celebration. I have another week. And we know this sounds a little bit, kind of a little bit way out, but we have the other midrash that David had no time in this world at all. And it was only this idea that Adam Arishon donated 70 years of his life to David that he had any life at all. But even though this midrash is not easy to understand how Adam was able to donate 70 years of his life. Nonetheless, there are actually many, many stories about similar kind of ideas. That's maybe a different discussion. So David's whole life, existentially, he had this feeling he had no place in this world. And that's why sometimes David falls to very, very, very low places, but he also rises to incredibly high places when he feels he has a place in the world. And he's so happy to be connected to God and so happy to be connected to God's world. And so he expresses it in the Psalms in the most poetic, elevated, inspirational way. But also his downs were down. So anyways, every week he realized, I have another week. He would make a celebration. And of course, David is called Na'im Zemirot Yisrael, the sweet singer of Israel. Na'im Zemirot Yisrael. I believe it's Rabbi Nachman who brings down that the three letters, the acronym, not in their order, of Na'im Zemirot Yisrael spells Zion, which means the letter Zion, but it also means a weapon. And Rabbi Nachman says that the weapon of Mashiach ben David will be prayer. That will be the weapon of Mashiach, is prayer. And this reflects what David HaMelech said, Va'ani tefillah, I am prayer. Now, David had lots of blood on his hands. He was a warrior. He conquered the largest borders of Eretz Yisrael. But God himself said to him, you can't build the temple because your hands are full of blood. That will be left to your son, Shlomo. Shlomo comes from the word shalom, shalem. Shlomo didn't fight any physical wars. There was peace his whole generation. So David is a key figure on Motzi Shabbat. And that's why, again, many people have different minhagim. There's all kinds of songs that are sung on Motzi Shabbat. And especially by the Chassidim, the idea of having a kumtzitz, a verbringen, a hidvadut, they're different words, but it's just a get together and singing and eating. Many people are very, very careful to break bread on Motzi Shabbat and have like a full meal. Other people, just like some people, don't make a full third meal. But many people have the custom, if they're going to eat something Motzi Shabbat, and most of us do have the munchies on Motzi Shabbat, that we'll call it, this is our Malava Malka. This is what I'm eating from Malava Malka. But there's another deep connection with David on Motzi Shabbat. And that is in the ritual called Kiddush Levana, sanctifying the moon. Every month, we have a ritual called Kiddush Levana of sanctifying the moon. According to the Vilna Gaon, you could do it from the third day of the month. By Hasidim, only from the seventh day. And you can only do it to the full moon. It has to be either between the third day and the full moon or the seventh day and the full moon. And the custom is you go outside, you look at them. If the moon is covered by clouds, you can't do it. You have to visibly see the moon. And then there's all these beautiful verses and different things to say that are connected to the moon because Israel is connected to the moon. We have a lunar calendar. But one of the things that we say in Kiddush Lavan is David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. This is where the song comes from. It comes from Kiddush Levana. David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam. David, the king of Israel, is alive and well, alive and thriving, alive and established. So we could ask, how can you say David is alive? I mean, even in the book of Shmuel, it says he died. So this explanation is the same thing about Yaakov. In the Torah, Yaakov dies. They bring his body back to Hebron. He's buried. And many years later, one of the sages said, Yaakov Avinu lo met. Yaakov Avinu did not die. So one of the sages said, what are you talking about? The Torah itself says he died. He's buried. And the sage says, are his children alive? Meaning his progeny. If his progeny is still alive, Yaakov is alive. So we're alive. So that means Yaakov is still alive. So it's the same thing with David. When we say David Melech Yisrael Chai V'Kayam, he's alive and well because we're singing about him. We're keeping him alive. He is alive. So that's just another deep connection with David on Motzi Shabbat. Okay, so tonight, hopefully, we did evening prayer going out of Shabbos. We did the different ways to make the separation between Shabbat and the week. We went through the different parts of havdala. As I said in the beginning, we didn't mention every single custom, every single opinion. We did our best in the time allotted to us. And we'll end with a blessing that, just like looking at the light reflected in our fingernails, that we always hold on to Shabbat, even during the week, that is the blessing of the whole week is coming from Shabbat. But we remember this idea that looking at the light in the fingernails is returning light, is or chozer. And that we always remember that our purpose in this world is to take the light of God, the light of Torah, and reflect it back into the world in the best way that we can.